Het strekt het Nederlandse volk tot ere dat het over de grootste vraagstukken van het leven en hun strekking voor de maatschappij spreekt en er moeilijk abstractie van kan maken. Het Nederlandse volk is principieel en houdt er niet van zijn beginselen weg te moffelen of te verzwijgen.
Anno Brandsma was born on February 23, 1881 in Hugo Cluster, a farming village close to the town of Bolsward. His father, Titus, was a wealthy livestock owner and a municipal councillor, while his mother, Shitski Postma, was a caring and deeply religious woman. With 4 sisters ahead of him, Anno was the much-awaited son whom they hoped would take over the farm. A second boy, Henrik, came much later. The young Anno was an earnest and intelligent boy, but it soon became obvious that he wasn't physically fit for a future in farming. On September 1892, at the age of 11, this son of a Frisian farmer took the train to Megan and enrolled at the St. Anthony Gymnasium, which was run by the Franciscans. 6 years later, on September 17, 1898, Anno entered the novitiate of the Carmelites in Boxmeer. He was only 18 years old. Growing up in a pious home, he must have felt an inclination towards a more mystical life, and he found it within the walls of the Carmelite monasteries. Following the custom of the time, Anno Brandsma had to select a religious name, and he chose the name of his father, Titus. In Boxmeer, Titus joined the order of the Carmelites, who considered themselves followers of the monks who once lived on Mount Carmel in the Holy Land, and were proud to have the prophet Elijah as their model and inspiration. There, Titus began his new daily routine of meditation, prayer, and work, of living in his own cell, but also being part of a community. Later, he would fondly recall that life in Carmel was simple, sincere, and healthy for both mind and spirit. In 1905, 8 Carmelites received the priestly ordination at St. Jan's Cathedral in Den Bosch. Among them was Titus Brandsma, a very active fellow blessed with a brilliant mind, but burdened with frail health. After the ordination, he celebrated his first Mass at the St. Martin Parish in Bolsward, the same church where he was baptized. In February 1906, Titus left for Rome together with fellow Carmelite Hubertus Dreysen, a teacher and a friend for life. They stayed in the San Alberto Monastery until 1909 while studying at the Gregorian University. Here, he found time to deepen the foundation of his Carmelite life and to live with God. For Titus, this did not mean being called to do greater things, but to do the ordinary things of everyday life in a great way. During the day, Titus studied philosophy at the Gregoriana, followed by extra courses in sociology at the Leontine Institute at night. Soon, the sickly young man had to pay the price for pushing himself too hard. In 1908, Titus became seriously ill, and people feared for his life. But because of the care and support given by his community, he eventually recovered. Titus did everything possible to catch up for his final exam, and in October 1909, he received his doctorate degree in philosophy. Back in the Netherlands, he was appointed professor in philosophy at the Carmelite School of Theology in Oss. There, he contributed a lot to the community and the people. He collected money for the construction of a reading center, initiated the building of a Christ the King monument, was directly involved in the establishment of the secondary trade school, which later became the Titus Brandsma Lyceum, and in 1919, he became the editor-in-chief of the newspaper De Stad Oss. The tireless Carmelite was also involved in many activities outside Oss. In his beloved Friesland, for example, he became the secretary of a Catholic Frisian organization in 1917 and was directly involved in organizing pilgrimages to the martyrs of Dokkum. When his mother visited in the summer of 1921, she found her son completely exhausted. It was only at the end of November that Titus was again allowed to resume his work. Years later, the order had planned to call Titus to Rome to become professor at San Alberto. However, when Titus eventually left Oss in 1930, he instead became a professor in philosophy and mysticism at the newly established Catholic University in Nijmegen, which he co-founded. Thus, Titus took up residence in the old city center, but because a Carmelite is not supposed to live alone outside a monastery, a new foundation was established in Nijmegen, the Kronenberg residence. Meanwhile, plans were made for the construction of a new monastery, which was completed in 1929 and blessed under the name of Roosendaal, with Titus Brandsma as its first prior. It was from this place that Titus shared his knowledge and learning in the service of people from the many fields of interest he was involved in: Catholic secondary education, mission, ecumenism, his beloved Friesland, the devotion to Mary, and the Dutch Catholic peace movement. The inspirational source for his interest in mysticism can be found in his own family, where religion and faith played very important roles. That interest was magnified during his stay with the contemplative Carmelites of the monastery in Boxmeer. It was an experience that influenced his entire life. He left many evidences of his deep interest in mystical life. He translated from French into Dutch the texts of Teresa of Avila, a reformer of Carmel, and whose works guided Titus on his mystical journey. He wrote articles for a Dutch magazine on spirituality. He left an extensive collection of handwritten mystical texts and was known for his interest in popular devotions, especially his devotion to and love for the Blessed Virgin Mary. In October 1932, as Rector Magnificus of the Catholic University in Nijmegen, Titus Brandsma delivered his famous inaugural speech. He reflected on the evolution of the image of God and indicated that every period in time has its own image of God, and that it is important for us to find God deep within ourselves. He also expressed great concern for those who were not successful in that search and eventually turn away from God. Aside from sharing his mystical experiences, he also expressed his belief in the process of change in every human being. New times require new forms, he said. This progressive vision was based on the development of the concept of God throughout the ages. With this, he established the basis for a renewed concept of God. We have to understand our own time, he said, and should not allow ourselves to escape its influence. It is a statement that resonates and rings true even in our own generation. Titus was a writer all his life, a man who eagerly wanted to share his ideas with others, and nurtured by a strong conviction on the importance of education. In 1935, while serving as editor-in-chief of the newspaper De Stad Os, Archbishop Jansen appointed him as spiritual advisor of the Catholic Journalists Organization. He was proud to have his own media identification card and felt at one with the journalists. And yet for Titus Brandsma, the Catholic press cannot be running around with blinders. In a radio program in 1936, he challenged the press when he declared, "We don't have Catholic newspapers for Catholic news only. We too want to be informed about other things happening around us." Freedom of education and of the press were two very important issues for him. With the German occupation of the Netherlands, Titus became even more active in defending these two advocacies. Thus, he became the soul of the educational resistance. In the second half of 1941, he brought to the attention of the bishops how the Catholic press was being provoked by forcing it to place advertisements on National Socialism. This resulted in the publication of a letter from the Dutch Bishops' Conference addressed to the directors and editors of Roman Catholic newspapers, stating that the placement of advertisements that support the movement for National Socialism had to be refused, or else the Catholic character of these publications would all but disappear. As spiritual director of Catholic journalists, Titus Brandsma was asked to visit all the different newspaper directors and to request them to sign a document stating that they would unanimously follow the directive of the bishops. He began his risky mission on January 1, 1942, traveling by train throughout the Netherlands, meeting with the different editors. One Sunday evening, on January 18, 1942, two German intelligence officers knocked at the door of the monastery in Nijmegen, searching for him. Fortunately, Titus was then in Amsterdam. The next morning, he returned to give lectures at the university, but in the early hours of the evening, the authorities returned and Titus Brandsma was arrested. On the morning of January 20, Titus was escorted by guards to Scheveningen and arrived at the prison that was often called the Orange Hotel. Here, he became the occupant of cell number 577. During his investigation, Titus explained why the ideology of National Socialism was not suitable to the Dutch people. This only convinced the Germans that he was a dangerous man and should remain in prison at least until the end of the war. Imprisoned in cell number 577, he wrote his last book, The Life of Teresa of Avila, and also composed his famous poem entitled Jesus. On March 12, after 51 days in his cell, Titus was transferred, together with 100 other prisoners, to the military camp in Amersfoort. Life in the camp was a living hell, but still, Titus went out of his way to minister to his fellow inmates, talking to them, praying together, or caring for the sick. It was in that camp where John Donnes, who was later executed, made a very touching drawing of prisoner number 58 in that worn-out prison uniform. On April 29, Titus returned to Scheveningen to be interrogated again by the German intelligence. During these interrogations, Titus could not recall anything of his earlier statements, and with this, his fate was sealed. After a short stay at the prison in Cleve, Germany, he was scheduled to be shipped off to the dreaded Dachau. Before leaving Cleef, he wrote to his prior in the Roosendaal in Nijmegen, asking him to try if he could get him permission to stay in a monastery in Germany. He also wrote to the government in The Hague for the same purpose, mentioning his bad health, but to no avail. On June 13, Titus was transported to Dachau. Traveling during the night with other prisoners, they arrived after 6 days. Titus was assigned with the other religious from Block 28 to one of the most difficult labor commandos. By then, the frail Carmelite priest had been completely broken by the regime, aside from being badly beaten by the guards. On July 12, he composed his last letter to his sister. It was written in German and ended with the words, "Don't worry about me." Physically and mentally exhausted, Titus allowed his confrere, Gabriel Thayers, to bring him to the hospital. As he was taken away, Titus said to him, "Now, my dear little brother, thanks for everything." In his last few days, he gave his handmade rosary to the nurse who assisted the camp doctor, saying that very soon he would not be using it anymore. He was in a coma for several days, until finally on Sunday, July 26, 1942, a little after noon, the doctor gave him a deadly carbol injection, and by 2 in the afternoon, Titus Brandsma drew his last breath. For his courage and example as a martyr for the cause of Christ and for press freedom, Pope John Paul II beatified Titus Brandsma on November 3, 1985. In 1991, the Carmelites in the Philippines established a center in Quezon City to house their formation community and administrative offices. On March 13, 1992, in rites led by His Eminence Jaime Cardinal Sin, the center was opened and named after Blessed Titus Brandsma, patron of the Philippine Carmelite Commissariat.